Hello, today we will be discussing cavalry and their marginal utility in EU4. So, the first thing to discuss is upkeep costs. An infantry costs 0.21 ducats a month to upkeep, while a cav costs 5.2. A mercenary infantry costs 0.52, the same as the normal cav. And a mercenary cav costs a stupendous 1.29 ducats per month upkeep. These are the base upkeeps. No modifiers are included at this time. We observe that cavalry cost about 2.5 times what an infantry does to upkeep, both normally and when a merc. The second thing, based on this observation, we can conclude that for every cav you would field, you would be able to also field 2 infantry and actually have a partial saving. This might lead one to want to test pure cav versus pure infantry armies. However, this testing is complicated by insufficient support. Insufficient support is a modifier which reduces the tactics of an army by 25% if the ratio of cav to infantry in that army exceeds the maximum allowed by that nation's tech group. Shown in the table are the different ratios allowed for the different tech groups. So a Westerner can have 50%, i.e. 1 cav for every infantry without incurring the penalty. But if he has more than this, say 4 cav but only 3 infantry, he'll incur the insufficient support penalty. This is at one end of the spectrum, where you're allowed only a relatively low amount of cav, 50%. At the other end of the spectrum, there are nomads, who are allowed 100% of cav without the penalty. Therefore, to not disadvantage cav-heavy compositions in the following tests and examples, all tests are performed with starting army compositions that do not incur the penalty. Furthermore, to investigate both extremes, tests are performed with Western and Nomad tech group nations. Cav-utilizing armies will be compared with their nearest equivalent cost infantry army, where the infantry army needs to be strictly lower in cost, so not just the nearest cost, but the nearest lower cost. This leads to the following tests. First, a small cav Western, which is a single infantry and a single cav, is compared to a small infantry Western. So our small cav Western with 1 infantry and 1 cav for a total upkeep cost of 0.73 is compared to a small pure infantry Western build with 3 infantry with an upkeep cost of 0.63. Then we repeat the same thing for a large Western with 18 infantry, then 2 cav, versus a large infantry pure Western with 22 infantry. Finally, we move on to the nomads, where we have a single nomad cavalry versus the same, or the equivalent cost small pure infantry nomad with 2 infantry. And finally, a large cav nomad with 20 cav versus a large infantry nomad with 48. Again, the nearest lower cost. Note that in every instance, the infantry army is the nearest cheaper army, not the absolute nearest. This could reasonably be expected to be a slight advantage for the cav-utilizing army compositions. Also worth noting is that it's the maximum combat width only at Tech 3. However, although the combat width will get larger at higher techs, this is not expected to impair the generality of the results. Hello, my helper for this video example is the family-friendly Kitten Destroyer 68.
Hello.
Thank you, good friend. Now, we are 2 Western nations. Yes, look, Western. We are equal tech. Tech 3. We have both got generic ideas, so there's nothing fancy affecting that, and we're going to be attacking with no river crossings, no generals, etc. So it's all just down to the units. To start with, we have single infantry, single horses versus triple infantry for effectively the same cost. Ready, steady, cook. We'll watch the rolls. So, an early negative roll, perhaps contributing to the horses losing, but that's why we're going to repeat the experiment twice more. And this time instant wipe for the horses. And last try. Here we go. And another loss to Team Horse. To follow this up, we will be doing larger stacks versus each other, a full combat width 18-2 for the horses, and 20 with 2 to reinforce for Team Infantry. On we go. We have the large stack versus the equally costed full width infantry with reinforcements. A couple of early good rolls for the infantry seem to have it for them. And again. I'll reinforce about when the fight's set to occur. Yep. Slightly better rolls for the horsey side, but our reinforcements have arrived. So we have one victory for the horses. One each. And we go for our third repetition. And a solid victory for the infantry. And here we go for another round. On the fourth he arrives. Start reinforcing. So it looks like the horses are winning a little. And then our reinforcements arrive, and our morale bar goes no lower while his plummets. And we'll do one more. And here we are for another iteration. He arrives at about the 10th. So even rolls so far, a bit better for the horses, a bit better for the infantry, way terrible for the infantry, a bit better for the horses. Alright, so now we're repeating the same process but for hordes. So 2 generic hordes, same tech, no generals, no terrain penalties for rivers, etc. Everything is just down to the units. Equally costing single horse stacks versus double infantry. If anything, it might slightly benefit having the extra shock because of the Nomad bonus here. But otherwise, oh, and the first horse is dead. We're going to repeat the process 3 times just to show that it isn't too influenced by rolls. Fight number 2. Go de-siege that province. And here we go. So zeros all round. Now 9 versus a 2, but it is, alas, too little too late, and we lose again. And then for time number 3, he arrives on the 12th, I arrive on the 25th, so that should be all fine. And here we go. And again the horses lose. Now we'll move on to the bigger unit stacks. And here we go with 20 stacks of cav versus, at most, 48 reinforcing of equally costed infantry. That being said, I don't actually expect the reinforcements to be entirely necessary. Nope. So that's 1 strike against Team Horse. Here's number 2. And we'll move into position for number 3. And again, it's nowhere near a victory for the horse. And we get fight number 3 on the way. Now, just to show there's no trickery, we'll have a look at the pips. It is standard Nomads versus standard Nomads. See all the pips, and we can go on. So I rolled better there. I've rolled better there. He's rolled better there, but he's finally starting to reinforce. I rolled better. He's rolled a bit better. He's rolled a bit better. His reinforcements arrive, and we run out of morale. So a resounding victory for Team Not Horses. Looking now at the results, we can see that the small cav Western lost 100% of the time to the small infantry Western. A clear victory for an infantry heavy build. Next, the large cav utilizing Western Army draws to the large infantry pure build Western Army. Thirdly, the small cav horde loses to the small pure infantry horde. Again, a victory for the pure infantry build. And finally, the large cavalry using horde loses 100% of the time to the large pure infantry horde. So we have 3 wins for pure infantry builds and 1 draw. Based on this observation, we can tell that the cavalry utilizing army compositions did not win any test when compared to the equivalent or lower cost exclusively infantry army, losing all but the large Western combat test. And we conclude that for the same upkeep cost, exclusively infantry-based armies perform as well as, and usually better than, cav utilizing armies. For large combat width engagements with very nearly equal unit numbers, rolls seem to become the deciding factor, more so than 1 or 2 cav at the edges or 1 or 2 extra infantry to reinforce a battle. Ah, you might say, but in determining the equivalent upkeep costs, you assume that the force limit wasn't being exceeded. So in comparing a 20 cavalry using Nomad versus a 48 infantry using Nomad, you were assuming that both had the same cost because you didn't go over your force limit in both cases, and that if you were including force limit, the infantry might no longer be as cost effective. In order to address this concern, we need to do some math regarding upkeep costs. We've already mentioned the base unit upkeep cost and how total upkeep is determined from this according to the total maintenance cost equals the sum of base upkeep costs times by the maximum of your force limit ratio and 1. This means that units aren't cheaper when you're below the force limit than their base cost, but when you go over the force limit ratio, it starts to cost more. And the force limit ratio is defined as the total number of units that a nation has compared to the maximum supported number of units. Assuming then that your force limit is being exceeded with a pure infantry army, you can combine those two equations to produce that the following: that the total maintenance cost, or TMC, equals the per infantry base upkeep cost, or PIBUC, times by the number of infantry being supported, multiplied by 2 times the number of infantry being supported minus the force limit divided by the force limit. Using this equation, it is possible to solve for the maximum number of infantry that can be supported, even including over the force limit costs, for a given target total maintenance cost. And this solution is given by the following equation. The number of infantry that can be supported is equal to the force limit plus the square root of the force limit squared minus 8 times the force limit times by your target maintenance cost divided by the per infantry base upkeep cost divided by 4. Then, using this and comparing our actual 20, and assuming a combat width of 20 was your actual force limit, then an equivalent cost full infantry army would only be able to have 28 units, not 48. This, however, is something of a moot point, as we recall how solidly the pure infantry army beat the pure cav army in all those tests. In fact, it only needed the reinforcements. It didn't need the reinforcements in one of them, and it used them only sparingly in the other 2. So even if you reduced the reinforcement down to an 8 rather than a full combat width of 20, it is not expected to modify that outcome. One final thought is that although more effective, a larger amount of manpower would be needed to field a 28 stack of pure infantry than 20 pure cav. However, if we recall that the upkeep cost of a mercenary infantry is the same as a non-mercenary cav, if manpower was an issue for you, you'd be better off using mercenary infantry than cav, as in non-mercenary cav, which would cost the same in an upkeep sense, but you would never run out of manpower. So, to summarize, 1 cav has the same upkeep cost as 1 merc infantry, and a merc infantry will never run out of manpower. Running out of morale is what loses most battles, in fact almost all of them. More units equals more total morale. You can have more total units for the same upkeep cost, and hence more total morale for the same upkeep cost using infantry than cavalry. If you're both below the combat width and the force limit, a pure infantry composition is superior for the same upkeep cost. The wider infantry army will be able to flank the smaller cav-using army and crush it. Once the armies reach a full combat width, this advantage no longer applies. The spare units over the combat width for the pure infantry army can be used to reinforce an existing battle, and this usually results in the infantry army having more staying power. However, it can be difficult to time optimally, ensuring your reinforcements don't arrive too early and hence lose lots of morale whilst waiting around and when other units are just removed from combat, but not so late that the enemy beats the first stack, gets a morale buff for winning a battle, and then your second stack arrives. Finally, when going over the force limit, costs become quadratic with the number of units, so there is a point when going far over the force limit where infantry will become cost ineffective, However, this is rarely encountered in practice. Final thoughts. All of the previous discussions was for standard base unit costs and so on without any modifiers. There are more and stronger traditions, ideas, and policies granting plus cavalry combatability than there are ones granting plus infantry combatability. However, infantry scale better into the late game than cavalry do, and you're going to have to get a fair way towards that if you want to unlock all those ideas, policies, and traditions. There are also somewhat stronger and more minus upkeep cost modifiers for infantry than there are cavalry. However, they're all nation specific, while minus cav cost, although rarer in a per tag sense with fewer nations getting it, can be achieved by everyone, assuming they're willing to take aristocratic ideas. And as a final thought, don't let thoughts or concerns about ideal compositions get in the way of you having fun. Goodbye.